Yo, dude, I'm such a mess. I'm always such a mess in these videos. Okay, let's all just excuse all the junk that I have everywhere. Hey, what's up, guys? I'm like literally on my floor and my room is kind of a mess, but I wanted to film the video that a lot of people have requested, and that is my Med-surg study video. So I wanted to talk about like clinical and things that I experienced, just to like log it all and give you guys who are probably going into Med-surg just like a heads up and tell you things that I've learned from my own experience. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jasmine and I am in my 5th rotation. I'm in my OB rotation right now and I just took Med-surg 2. So in my school we have Med-surg 1, which is taken with Pharm, and that's taken after fundamentals, and then Med-surg 2, which is taken after mental health. I found making Med-surg 1 a lot more difficult than taking Med-surg 2, because of course all the information is brand new, you're not used to, the questions are worded and asked. So even though I did take Med-surg 1 and Med-surg 2, I'm going to be primarily talking about Med-surg 2 because that's the most recent class for me, and I just think it's more beneficial for me to talk about how I studied for Med-surg 2 because that's the class that I got an A in versus Med-surg 1. I'm going to talk a little bit about my Med-surg 1 experience. In Med-surg 1, I had been rotated to a acute hospital. It has a faster turnover rate and there was an OR and an ER there. So as a Med-surg 1 student, it was a really good experience because you were able to go to the ER. Not as many codes actually in the acute hospital as there are in a long-term hospital, surprisingly, at least from my experience. Like the first time that we did like med passes, and we were able to do IVs in the ER, but unfortunately I wasn't able to do that. And if I'm being quite honest, I still haven't done an IV on an actual patient. Like I've done things like the butterfly needle, which is like way easier than an IV. But I'm hoping to eventually do an IV because it's actually kind of like embarrassing the fact that I haven't done it. But it's kind of how it goes in clinical, like you get what you get. Moving on to my clinical experience in Med-surg 2. So I wasn't actually that excited about my clinical rotation for Med-surg 2 just because I was actually in a long-term acute hospital. I talked a little bit about it in my update video. To my surprise though, I did get a lot of experience in that hospital. It's a really good place to learn, I will say, because a lot of things do happen at the hospital. Like almost every single time that we went there, there was a code. It's a good place to learn like compressions or bagging, or it does happen where patients do expire there, and you get to learn like post-mortem care. We also did, that's like the first place that I was able to learn like the butterfly needle or like the blood draws. We also learned the meds through like the PICC line, and there's just so many things that we learned at that rotation, and that like just goes to show maybe you don't like the rotation or like the site that you're at, but if you really, especially for me, I had it on a Friday and my theory was on a Wednesday or a Tuesday, and I had like so much time to prepare for clinical. I really did get a lot out of it. Some things that we did in clinical, we did these things where it was like the med worksheets, and I kind of hated it at first because I was irritated that we had to do like paperwork for clinical, and then we have like, I shouldn't show it, but it was a nursing process worksheet, and this is something that we had to do every single time after clinical, and we would talk about it in post-conference or we turn it in, and it just talks about like the assessments, like objective, subjective, nursing diagnosis, patient, SMART goals, and like other different things like management of care, safety, basic care and comfort, just basic stuff like that. Those were like a lot of stuff that I had to do. I didn't really like doing the paperwork for clinical because it was kind of annoying to do, because I felt like it did take away from the experience of like being hands-on with your patient, like learning about your patient, because you'd constantly be like writing stuff from their chart. You'd be so fixated on like filling out like the subjective data that you had to find rather than actually just talking to them naturally. Something that was kind of weird that I didn't think was weird until someone had told me, but it was my professor didn't actually assign us nurses. So it was kind of weird how we just like would find our own random nurse and just be like asking them, oh, can I shadow you for today, rather than being assigned. But that's like what I've been going through since like Med-surg 1. But in OB, I guess it's a little bit different because they do assign you nurses, and I like that a lot better than having to like scavenge around the area to find an RN. Moving on to the part that like literally everyone and their mothers have asked me about, and that is how I study for Med-surg. So the book that we use is this book right here. We use a different edition of it, but I just bought what edition is this? This is the 9th edition. So they asked us to get the 10th edition, but it's a lot more expensive. I would not suggest for you to get the 10th edition because it's a lot more expensive. Just get the 9th edition because truth be told, it's a lot similar. Like it's actually like 99% similar to the next edition. Like they just change a couple things, move around some images, and make a new edition. That's what I found. And I always try to get the cheaper edition. And this is the Lewis Medical Surgical Nursing book. And I also have, sorry, it's been in the background the whole time, the study guide for it. And I got these both on Amazon. Do not buy textbooks from your school, because I did that the first time I took class at my school, and I spent over $250. And this one I spent like maybe 10 bucks on, and this one maybe like 30. So definitely don't buy it from your school. Just get it from online, get it from Amazon, get it from like Chegg. Those are good places to find your textbooks, because, and even Amazon Marketplace, they have some cheap ones. Or not Amazon, Barnes & Noble Marketplace, I think. They have good deals on textbooks. I also use the ATI book. It's a purple one. I'll put it right here. I actually lost mine. I don't know where my ATI book went, but I do have the PDF because our school utilizes ATI and they have it online. So I just have the PDF of it, and I would just print out important parts. Okay, so moving on to how I studied. For Med-surg 1 and 2, I felt like I mainly would focus on the PowerPoints that my professor would show us. And while that was good enough information, I would always cross-reference it with this book, the big textbook. And this helps further clarify the information, because in Med-surg 1 and 2, there's so much information and you can only touch base on it on the PowerPoints. So for you really to grasp the information, I would suggest reading it in here. But what I found a lot of people did, and had like the mistake of doing, and even myself, like I've done this before, is just reading the chapter like front to back, like the whole chapter. And that's like the most inefficient way to study, and that's what I've really learned. The most efficient way to study that I found was for me to just go through the PowerPoints and mark it up in the book. So when I mark it up in the book, I can just further clarify what our professor wants us to know and focus on, as opposed to just reading the whole chapter so blindly and not knowing where to focus. What I did was I used, so for each exam, okay, I'll kind of show this one. Okay, so this is what I did for one of the exams. I think this is our first exam. I was still kind of getting the hang of it, so it might not be that good of a study guide. But I do make a study guide, and it's like exam 1, and then I will put, I like using the tables because it separates it better, and like acute versus chronic diseases, just so I can like compare them. And what I would do is I would retype. I'm not much of like a, a writer person who likes to do it by hand. I like doing everything typed. I like don't even take my notes on paper anymore. I just type it. There's a plane that's going by. To do this, I would rewrite the notes and make them into my own words or whatever, and then I would cross-reference the book, and I would put more detail into it. I would also cross-reference the ATI, but the ATI is more of a summary, and what I would do is I would make my study guides and I would read through my study guides, and then I would read through the ATI, because the ATI is more of a summary of the chapter. For this book, it's a study guide, and here's like a better look of it. It would just show more like practice questions. It's not a place of like summary or reference. It's more to just test your knowledge, and I used it a little bit in the beginning, but I found the Med-surg success book, I'll put it right here. I found that to be a lot more helpful because it has more NCLEX style questions as opposed to this one, where it's testing your knowledge specifically on the Lewis book, the textbook, and it would show like list, I don't know if you can see it, list the something 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 versus being all multiple choice. In addition to making my own study guide, I'd read the book. I use a lot of resources like the textbook, ATI, and all that, the study guide. I also found this very helpful for learning medications. So as I talked about in the beginning, our clinical rotation had a lot of medications that we needed to know, and our professor would come up to us whenever we're passing meds and ask us to make sure that we know that what we're giving the patients. Oh, this is kind of dirty, but this is the Mosby Pharm memory note cards, and I also use this in pharmacology. I found it helpful for me because I'm not really a visual learner, but to some extent this has helped me. I'll kind of show what it looks like. So this is like for transdermal medications, like do's and don'ts. They would just give like helpful visuals, and I really like that because first of all, it's a really like compact size where you wouldn't have to lug it around like the huge textbook we have, and I would just like that a lot better. What else? I'm trying to like look over what I did. So I think these are my notes. So I do type my notes. I always type my notes because I like being able to move them around and like having space and not having all this like mess. Because I'm a really messy writer, so I need to type my notes. But I would go to something called PALS, which is a tutoring thing that my school has from previous students teaching us how to study for the classes, and like just a review session of each week's material. Okay, and I would go to that. It was actually right before my exam, so the day before my exam. So that was really helpful for me just because I would learn the material up until, like I had theory and I had my quizzes on Tuesdays, but PALS, which is tutoring, would be on Monday. So by Monday, I would already know my material like 99%. So that PALS or tutoring would be just a refresher for me and just a way to gauge how I'm grasping with the material and kind of just testing myself versus using that as my sole like review tool, as in someone like teaching me the information the first time. So I just found that to be really helpful. Another thing I did was I would sometimes review with my friend, and I don't find huge study groups to be helpful, so anything like 4 or more would be kind of pushing it because you would just have side conversations, you wouldn't really focus. So I would just study with like one other person. What we did was we would do I don't write all my notes. I never write any of my notes. I really should, but I don't because I hate my handwriting. But we would go on the whiteboard, and like I just took a picture of this whiteboard that we did, and we would write, like for this it was comparing cholecystitis to GI bleed. And another thing I found helpful was to make charts. So this one has like the cause, I don't know if you can see it, like cause, signs and symptoms, diagnostic and treatment, and that was just a good way to get the gist of the disease. And then we did it again for like osteoarthritis and rheumatoid arthritis. I don't know if you can really see it, but we would just do that on the board, and that would be right before our tutoring session, so we'd gauge how well we're grasping it again. But I think that's basically it. So the basic gist of how I studied for Med-surg 2 was I would utilize a lot of resources. And the thing with Med-surg too is you have to dedicate a lot of time. It's not necessarily like hard information, but it's so much information. And it's hard to sometimes distinguish between like rheumatoid arthritis and osteoarthritis. They're both arthritis, but like what's the difference? And you need to know like the signs and symptoms, diagnostic, treatment. A lot of the questions were focused on nursing interventions, so know those, and those you can find a lot of them in the ATI book because that's very specific to that. But yeah, that's just how I studied. I hope you guys got something out of it, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you have any questions about my clinical experience or what to know, what to learn, and just any of those types of questions, just leave them down below and I'll try to get to them. But that's pretty much it for this video, and I'll see you guys in the next video because I need to study for I need to actually write a paper because OB is so much busy work this term. But I'll see you guys later. Bye!